The champagne cork popped at 35,000 feet, and Marcus Chen didn't even flinch. He was too busy staring at Jennifer, his secretary of 3 years, watching the golden bubbles rise in her glass as she laughed at something trivial. The leather seats of the first-class cabin cradled them in luxury, and somewhere in his mind, a small voice whispered that this was wrong. But he silenced it quickly, the way he'd been silencing his conscience for months now. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the woman flying this plane, steady hands on the controls and eyes fixed on the horizon, was his wife of 15 years. And she was about to teach him the most profound lesson of his life. Sarah Chen had suspected for months. The late nights at the office. The new cologne. The way Marcus's eyes no longer met hers over morning coffee. When she'd found the plane tickets on his laptop, a romantic getaway to Costa Rica, 2 seats booked under Mr. Chen and guest, her world had crumbled. She'd sat in their bedroom, the same room where they'd dreamed together, planned their future, and whispered promises in the dark, and she'd cried until there were no tears left. But Sarah wasn't just Marcus's wife. She was also Captain Sarah Chen, one of the youngest female pilots at Pacific Airways, a fact that Marcus often forgot to mention at dinner parties. He preferred to talk about his own achievements, his real estate empire, the deals he'd closed. Sarah had learned to smile quietly, to let him have his spotlight, because that's what love did, it made space for the other person to shine. Except now, as she performed her pre-flight checks for Flight 847 to San Jose, she wasn't sure what love meant anymore. "Captain, we're ready for pushback," her co-pilot, David, said, glancing at her with concern. He'd noticed her distraction, the way her jaw was set a little too tight. "Copy that," Sarah replied, her voice steady and professional. Years of training had taught her to compartmentalize, to lock away personal turmoil when lives depended on her focus. But today, that skill was being tested like never before. She'd seen them board, had watched on the security feed as Marcus guided Jennifer through the gate, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Jennifer was young, maybe 26, with that effortless beauty that came from not yet knowing real heartbreak. Sarah had felt something crack inside her chest, but she'd taken a deep breath and walked to the cockpit. The flight was smooth, the weather perfect, cruel irony for the storm raging in Sarah's heart. Through the intercom, she could hear the flight attendants serving drinks, the murmur of passenger conversations, the occasional laugh. She wondered if one of those laughs belonged to Marcus. About 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, the plane hit unexpected turbulence. Nothing dangerous, just enough to rattle the passengers, to remind them they were suspended in a metal tube miles above the earth. Sarah heard the gasps through the cabin audio, felt the aircraft shudder. And then she heard something else. A child crying, panicked and afraid. "Mommy, Mommy, I'm scared." The voice pierced through everything, Sarah's pain, her anger, her sense of betrayal. It was pure, innocent fear, the kind that reminded you what actually mattered in life. She made an announcement, her voice calm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen speaking. We've hit a small pocket of rough air, but there's nothing to worry about. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be through this shortly." In seat 3A, Marcus heard that voice and froze. Captain Chen. It couldn't be. But he'd recognized that voice anywhere, the same voice that had whispered, "I do," 15 years ago, that had sung lullabies to their daughter before they'd lost her to leukemia 5 years back, that had held him when his mother died. His face drained of color. Jennifer noticed immediately. "Marcus, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He had. The ghost of the man he used to be, the one who'd loved his wife completely, before grief had built walls between them, before he'd sought comfort in all the wrong places. The turbulence worsened. Alarms began to sound in the cockpit. David's voice was tight with tension. "Captain, we're getting some unusual readings from the left engine." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, but her mind was fracturing. She thought about Marcus below her, about the vows they'd made, about their daughter's grave that she visited alone now because Marcus couldn't bear to face it. She thought about crashing this plane. The thought came and went in a millisecond, horrifying her. She would never, could never, not just because of the 187 other souls on board, but because that wasn't who she was. Even in her darkest moment, even with her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, she was still someone who chose life, who chose to save rather than destroy. David, run the engine failure checklist. And get me ground control. Now. Her voice was steel. Whatever was happening in her personal life, she was still a captain. Still a professional. Still someone who understood that her pain didn't give her the right to inflict pain on others. The next 20 minutes were intense. The engine had developed a critical malfunction, rare but manageable with the right skills. Sarah executed an emergency descent, her voice calm over the intercom as she explained the situation, asked passengers to assume brace positions as a precaution. In first class, Marcus was praying for the first time in years. Not for himself, but for everyone on this plane. And for his wife, whose steady voice was the only thing keeping panic at bay. How had he forgotten how strong she was? How capable? How had he let the best thing in his life slip through his fingers? Sarah brought the plane down at an alternate airport in Mexico, the landing so smooth that passengers actually applauded when the wheels touched the runway. Emergency vehicles surrounded them, but everyone was safe. Every single person would walk off this plane and return to their lives, their loved ones, their second chances. As passengers deplaned, Sarah finally left the cockpit. She stood at the exit, thanking people for their patience, accepting their praise with a modest smile. And then she saw him. Marcus stood in the aisle, Jennifer nowhere in sight. His eyes were red, his face aged 10 years and 3 hours. Sarah, he whispered. She looked at him, this man she'd loved, this stranger she no longer knew. 100 emotions fought for dominance, anger, betrayal, love, loss. You saved my life, he said quietly. After everything I've done, you saved my life. I didn't do it for you, Sarah replied, her voice breaking for the first time. I did it because that's who I am. That's who I've always been. Someone who chooses love over hate. Life over death. Forgiveness over revenge. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Marcus crumpled into a seat, his face in his hands, sobbing. I'm so sorry. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. After Emma died, I couldn't face the pain. I couldn't face you because you reminded me of everything we'd lost. So I ran. I'm a coward. Sarah felt her own tears finally come. We both lost her, Marcus. But you weren't there. You left me alone in that grief, and it almost destroyed me. So I threw myself into flying, into work, into anything that would make me feel like I still had purpose. Other passengers moved past them, shooting curious glances. Jennifer had apparently already deplaned, probably sensing that this was a moment she had no place in. I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah said honestly. Not today, maybe not ever. But I can tell you this, when I was up there, deciding whether your life mattered, I chose to believe that people can change. That second chances exist. That even in our worst moments, we're still capable of choosing better. Marcus looked up at her, this woman who had just saved his life in more ways than one. I don't deserve you. No, Sarah agreed. You don't. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we're all imperfect, all broken, all struggling to be better than we were yesterday. I'm going to find a hotel room tonight, and I'm going to decide what my future looks like. You need to decide if you want to be a man worthy of second chances, or if you want to keep running from pain until there's nothing left of who you used to be. She walked past him, shoulders straight, heart heavy but somehow lighter too. Because she'd faced her darkest moment and chosen light. She'd had the power to destroy and chosen to save. Not because Marcus deserved it, but because mercy and grace weren't about deserving. They were about who you chose to be when no one would blame you for being cruel. Behind her, Marcus sat alone in the empty plane, finally understanding what he'd lost and what it might cost to earn it back. The journey to Costa Rica was over before it began, but perhaps a more important journey, the one back to his own humanity, was just starting. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is extend compassion when everything in us screams for vengeance. Sometimes strength looks like landing a plane safely when you could have let it fall. Sometimes love means saving someone who broke your heart, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be the kind of person who chooses kindness anyway. Sarah Chen chose kindness that day. And in doing so, she saved more than just a plane full of passengers. She saved herself.